So everything we've done up to this point through these past few weeks has been leading up to this moment because this class is the history of rock and roll. And all these origins we've been studying have led us to this moment. Rock and roll. Woo! Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to dive right in. So around the late 40s and early 1950s, all the elements of country, Tim Pan Alley, spirituals, blues, and rhythm and blues coalesced, kind of like came together, right? And became the first music classified as rock and roll. And again, that name kind of came from Alan Freed coining the phrase, allegedly, on his radio show in Cleveland, Ohio. So the racial divide in the U.S. was still very present in keeping music segregated into white and black. There was a lot of pressure from the elders in communities for the teenagers and the kids to only listen to music by artists that were the same skin color as them. There was racial divide in radio stations. Sometimes you'd even have, only one day a week where they would allow black music to be played. It kind of depended on where you were and who was calling the shots. Ooh, sorry, it's kicked my desk. So this caused a huge point of conflict between many white teens and their parents, who didn't often approve of music that was loud, suggestive, and sung by black artists. While several of the founding fathers of rock were white, we talked about, we haven't talked about it yet, but some of you for your projects did Jerry Lee Lewis, Buddy Holly, Carl Perkins, a few of those guys who were white, Bill Haley. But anyway, it is indisputable that the influences of rock and roll were much more deeply rooted in black culture and black history, and that the white artists that were participating in making this sound were pulling their influences from black music, rhythm and blues, and all of that. So you might think it pretty common because this is sort of when this became a thing, but the idea that teenagers want to be different than their parents, this was sort of a new idea in America. Before all of this, if you picture back to maybe like 100 years ago or 200 years ago, America looked very different. It was more of a rural experience. You grew up either on a farm or in a little house somewhere, and all you really had was your family. Maybe there was a town, but it was very different. There wasn't as much of a teenage culture like there is now. And I know it's hard to even imagine it being different than it is now. And the reason this kind of happened, we're going to go to this next paragraph. With the end of World War II in the rearview mirror, so right, World War II is happening. All the soldiers that hadn't been killed in war came home and they wanted to settle down, get back to normal, and they started having families. When those kids became teenagers, well, that was called the baby boom, first of all. You guys have heard the okay boomer and all that stuff in modern culture, right? But the baby boomer generation was that group of people that were born right after World War II when the GIs came home. So that group of kids, when they all became teenagers, for the first time, America had a huge group of teenagers that wanted their own identity. It was kind of a new concept. They wanted their own fashion, their own hairstyles, their own music. Before, teenagers just sort of grew up and then, okay, I better start making a living or doing the chores or doing whatever. It was sort of a different vibe. Now, people had money to burn. The American economy was booming because we had all these factories left over from making, airplanes and tanks and things. And now we're making refrigerators and modern conveniences and cars and all these things. People had money to spend on non-essentials. Kids had pocket money, allowance money. And sometimes they even had part-time jobs. Before, you might just work on the family farm and you didn't get paid. But now maybe you work part-time waiting tables or whatever. So because they had this money to burn and they didn't need it for survival so much, there was money to spend on luxuries and cultural things, records, outfits, makeup, things that weren't really an option before. So as a result, record sales boomed. And last week we talked about record technology, the 33 LPs and the 45 singles. Those were the need and the want for those things. They were a huge commodity. There was a ton of money to be made in this industry. And it also was a way that music was driving culture, and you have jukeboxes and people are hanging out and listening to music on jukeboxes. It was a culture very much tied in with music, which is really fascinating because, again, this wasn't necessarily the case before. But again, these kids were listening to music that was not their parents' music, which is the big takeaway here. And obviously that music was heavily influenced by rhythm and blues. All right, next paragraph. And again, I'm like reading it, but I'm more saying it in my own words. So just kind of follow along best you can. Excuse me, and read it on your own. While it might seem silly for parents to mind the race of their children's favorite musical artists, keep in mind that most places in the U.S. at this time were still segregated by either Jim Crow laws, which is one of your vocabulary words. Excuse me. And the Jim Crow law was that whole separate but equal thing where you'd have like 2 waiting rooms at a bus station and then whites and blacks, and they would be separate but equal, but almost always the facilities for black folks were never as nice. They might have a college for whites and a college for blacks, and they never had the same resources or money or quality of education. Almost always it was better at the white facility. So that's what Jim Crow laws are. And that was going on in the South. And in the North, there weren't Jim Crow laws, but there was still a lot of segregation by custom, just kind of out of habit, the way that people live their lives. Also remember the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, which is a domestic terrorist group because they murdered and harassed Americans, still do to this day, but on a smaller scale. Just one generation prior in 1925. So remember, we're talking about the 40s and 50s. So one generation prior, they had an estimated 3 to 6 million members in the U.S. So keep in mind, that is still fresh, okay? That is still raw. It is still a concern. So maybe the laws had shifted, but a lot of the prejudices were still very, very present. We're even seeing some bleed from that into this current generation. And a lot of parents, especially white parents, did not take kindly to the idea, especially of their daughters screaming over black artists up on stage. Okay. Again, we might not think anything of that, maybe, and I'm glad that many of us don't think a thing of that now. That's great. But at the time, that was seen as inappropriate by a lot of people. Also, a lot of the music itself, not just the people singing it, but a lot of the subjects in the music, like we talked about with rhythm and blues, where songs might have suggestive lyrics, alluding to sex or alluding to partying or alluding to driving fast cars or things that the parents didn't want their kids listening to. Also, the dance moves a lot of the time were very loud, out of control. Elvis Presley shaking his hips, Jerry Lee Lewis standing on the piano, Little Richard putting his leg up on the piano and playing. Like these things, I know it seems crazy to us because we're used to what's her face? The Anaconda song by, we're used, like our perception of what's inappropriate is so different than it was in the 50s. So rock and roll was preached against in churches, thought of as the music of the devil. Parents and teacher organizations like the PTO, instead of raising money for the carnival, were worried about keeping rock and roll out of their kids' lives. It's a crazy thing to even think about nowadays. So down here we've got I love this photo of Elvis because he's got people pressed up against the stage, just going berserk. Wouldn't want to be up in the front getting smushed against the stage, that's for sure. And here's a great photo I love of some young women hanging out, but you see they've got all those 45 records and they're looking at all the different labels and they're playing all the different records and enjoying listening to music together. I love that photo. I love this poster here. Stop needless noise. Keep America calm. I think that's hilarious. I think that's an actual poster from back in the day. Here's Jerry Lee Lewis standing on his piano. Again, to us, that might not seem crazy, but for the time that was seen as inappropriate. Here's Little Richard with his leg up on the piano. Love him. All right, here are your vocab words for the week. I'm going to attempt to have us use the Kami Chrome extension that should be on all of your computers at this point. If that doesn't work, we will just use a Google Doc like we have been before. Okay? With Kami, if you go to the top and click Open with Kami, you should be able to make a text box and type your answers and then submit right into this document. So we're going to try and set that up. But anyway, I want you to define rock and roll, baby boomer generation, Jim Crow laws, and the Ku Klux Klan. Down below, we have a great photo of Chuck Berry with one of his signature wide stance. He would do the duck walk, which I don't know if we'll get to that or not because online, but he had a lot of signature moves that became guitar like 101. If you want to learn to play guitar, you copy Chuck Berry. And again, we have more screaming fans over here, something that the parents probably were not into. Okay, on this next page, we have our 9, 10, 11 founding fathers of rock and one imposter. So I want you to go over to the website. Let me pull it up here. Boop. Okay, let that load. So you're going to look up the corresponding pictures on the website. Founding Fathers of Rock tab. Now again, the YouTube videos on here, if you have really good internet, you can use those, but I would recommend using Spotify. It takes less bandwidth. The sound quality is better. Okay? All right. So I'd prefer you to use the Rock and Roll Founding Father playlist on my Spotify. If you would like to use the YouTube videos, by all means. I'm just saying, if you have satellite internet or not very strong internet, I would not recommend using that. Okay, it's going to slow your whole thing down. But again, correlate the picture. Who's this? Little Richard. Again, I'm hoping in Kami, the Chrome extension, you can just make a text box right under, like double click, add text box and open with Kami, add a text box and just type Little Richard right under the picture. That's the idea. Hopefully that is working at this point. And then Chuck Berry, Buddy Holly, etc., etc. I want you to label these folks, okay? You need to know these for the test, just like all the other tests. This guy right here is Pat Boone. Pat Boone is not a founding father of rock because he made his living stealing songs by black artists, making them more white sounding, and then making a bunch of money on it because the parents didn't want their kids listening to like Little Richard or listening to Chuck Berry or listening to Fats Domino. So Pat Boone would essentially just rip off their music. Now, we always have to have the discussion too, because like Elvis, for example, was influenced by a lot of rhythm and blues artists. Like he sang Hound Dog, for instance, that was a cover of a Big Mama Thornton song. But I don't think Elvis specifically set out to make his music sound more white. You know what I mean? He had that country vibe in there. But Pat Boone literally took the songs and squared them up. And you'll see when you listen to the Spotify track of Pat Boone singing Tutti Frutti, you're going to be like, what did I just listen to? Okay. So again, I'm not saying that Elvis necessarily gave Big Mama Thornton her due, but I definitely think he wasn't trying to change the vibe of the song. I definitely view that one more as he was influenced by Big Mama Thornton. Pat Boone definitely was just trying to make a buck, in my opinion. You can do some more reading on your own if you're curious about that. All right, there are a lot of songs this week because this whole class is history of rock and roll, and this is rock and roll. Like, this is it, man. There's rock after this. Many different types of rock, but rock and roll is actually a very short period of time, maybe 3 to 5 years. And that's it. And we're in it right now, baby. So listen to these songs, learn them, love them. Okay? You're going to listen to these songs and you're going to do the listening jots. Hopefully if you open with Kami, you click right here, open, and then Kami. Okay? And then you'll make a text box, type your notes. Again, if it doesn't work, we'll just do it in a separate document. Please try and do it in Kami. Okay, it's 2 pages of songs, so just buckle up. But this is your only assignment for the week, is this. So learn it, love it. Okay, if you have any questions about this at all, please email me and do the Kahoot review, take the quiz. Good luck, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.